Hi, my name is Libby, and I'm a grateful believer and follower of Jesus Christ in recovery for codependency. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, the oldest of 4 girls. I grew up in a legalistic but loving Christian environment. When I was 5 years old, I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior and loved Him with all my heart and dreamed of being a missionary nurse to Africa someday. My family never missed church, ever. We were there every Sunday morning and evening, and any other time the doors were open. Even on vacation, if we were out of town, we would find an appropriate church and visit there. There was not a single youth activity I wasn't involved in. My parents taught Sunday school, my dad was a deacon, led the Christian Service Brigade. We were the ideal Christian family. My father was my hero. In my eyes, he was perfect, and I don't ever remember him doing anything wrong. I lived to make my dad happy, and that really didn't take much. I felt his unconditional love and acceptance. I wanted to please him. Just before starting junior high school, our family moved to a small town south of Little Rock, Arkansas, to live near my grandparents. 5 years later, during the summer before my senior year, my father unexpectedly died from a massive brain aneurysm. He was only 47 years old. My mom, my sister, and I were out of town overnight, and he wasn't found until the next morning by my grandmother and 2 youngest sisters. My father's death changed my life. I was only 16 years old. He had been my security and my best friend. We were very close, and I just couldn't imagine life without him. Mom and I were not close, and we fought quite a bit. I could never seem to make her happy, no matter how hard I tried. Pleasing her was like trying to hit a moving target. I never got quite close enough to hit the bullseye. I carried a huge amount of guilt, wishing my mom had died instead of my dad. In my heart, I was sure God had made a mistake. My life was miserable without my father to confide in, and there was no talking to my mom. I believed she preferred my younger sisters over me and sensed jealousy from her because my dad and I were so close. I was a very quiet, shy, and awkward teenager. I only had a few friends. I found my security in being a skilled pianist and an accomplished seamstress. I was also a voracious reader and believed I was never really alone. I didn't know at this point in my life what codependency was, and certainly didn't know I was living in that world. But now, looking back, I can see it very clearly. After high school, I went to Bible college, determined to change my name and image from Libby, the quiet, shy, never had a date in high school, wallflower, to Elizabeth, Miss Social Butterfly. I succeeded on the social side, but was only called Elizabeth by my professors. Throughout college, I hungered for people to like me, and I tried valiantly to win their approval. I tried to be my instructor's favorite student, to be the best pianist in the entire school, and ultimately win the attention and heart of a nice Christian preacher-to-be. I graduated college with my heart broken several times, and somehow believed that if I could have been better at playing the piano, if I was prettier, if I'd made better grades, it was more interesting, more fun to be with, the relationships would have succeeded. But they didn't, and it was my fault, and I was a failure. I moved to California after graduate school and began working with a Christian organization. Through a mutual friend, I met my husband. He was a career Army man, so all I could see in my future with him was travel and lots of excitement living all over the world. We wrote lots of letters, barely dated, and in less than a year, we were married. My fantasy of marriage and the reality of marriage were poles apart from what I believed them to be. When we married, my husband and I hardly knew each other, and the more I found out about him, the less I liked him. But it was my responsibility to make the marriage succeed, and I became enslaved to the pursuit of fixing my marriage. I became thoroughly enmeshed in codependency, though I still didn't know what that word meant. It was what I knew. It was comfortable, and it was the only system I knew I could use to survive. The same old patterns I grew up using with renewed energy and force. I was trying anything and everything to please him, the old moving target routine, being personally responsible for his unhappiness. It was all too familiar, and I didn't know how to change him. His threats of leaving and divorce over the years only fueled my need to try harder. Once again, I accepted the blame and believed that if I was a better wife, mother, money manager, housekeeper, and companion, he would want to stay. We had 3 boys within 6 years. They were the one good thing to happen to me during this time, and they were my life. After nearly 20 years of being a career Army wife, my husband, my 3 boys, and I settled in Little Rock, Arkansas. We found a home at Fellowship Bible Church, which I now realize was completely God's providence. I immediately felt at home at Fellowship and developed relationships that sustained me through the turbulent years to come. Our home life was completely tumultuous. Feelings of rejection, coupled with extreme emotional and verbal abuse, and my husband's many extramarital affairs, were accentuated by him being away from home for long periods of time. I practically raised my sons alone. I took them to t-ball, baseball, basketball practice and games. I taught them how to ride a bike, read, hammer a nail, and build things. One year during our homeschooling years, I even taught them to cross-stitch. They would deny it now, but I have the bookmarks to prove it. I struggled to balance homeschooling my sons, teaching piano lessons, keeping the house maintained, attending basketball and baseball games, and making ends meet financially. My husband eventually moved to Texas to start a new job. What he actually chose to do was to begin a whole new life without us. After 7 months of driving to West Texas monthly so the boys could visit their dads, he suddenly announced that he didn't want us to come back. I was finally forced to accept the fact that my marriage was over. Even though in essence I had been living this life since my son's births, I officially began my journey of single motherhood. I tried to be both mom and dad, but I realized I just wasn't cut out to do that. I could not teach my boys how to be a man. I couldn't fill that place in their lives that only a father can fill. I relied heavily on the Lord during this period, but felt so responsible for the loss in my boys' lives. I tried to provide everything I could, things that I thought they needed, even though I couldn't afford it. Guilt and shame haunted me day and night because the way life now was for my boys. No father, very little money, the death of their dreams, and my own. I had a very close relationship with my boys. I believed we could talk about everything. At some point, I had the talk with them, but of course, by that time, they already knew everything. I tried desperately to discourage rebellion, the wrong crowd, alcohol, tobacco, drugs, and pornography. I realized I wasn't very successful, and after several years of trying to keep the family together, we fell apart. One son ended up in rehab for alcohol, drug addiction, and attempted suicide. Another son decided to live part of the week with a teacher and her husband, which was actually a good family environment. One son eventually quit school in his junior year of high school, left home, and even lived for a few months under the bridge with other homeless people. I felt like a complete and total failure. I blamed myself, and I blamed their father. During this time, I continued to do my best to process all the changes in my life and in my boys' lives. By this time, my boys had outgrown me by at least 8 inches. So when there was conflict, I was the one to leave for fear that I would get hurt. Home life was awful. I had no control over my children. If I kicked them out and changed the locks, they knew how to crawl in through a bedroom window. I was threatened and lied to. And it was not uncommon in the middle of the night to receive a collect call from an inmate at the Pulaski County Detention Center. I bailed my kids out of jail with borrowed money and lies. I paid to get cars out of the impound lot, covered lawyer fees, court costs, tickets, and probation. I had absolutely no control. I told them if they ended up in jail again, not to call me. But they did. And over again, I found myself going back to get them out of trouble. I didn't know why I was doing this, except that I felt so guilty that they had been cheated out of a father. Around this time, a friend very kindly approached me about joining the band with Celebrate Recovery. It was as if he was implying I needed the program. I couldn't think of a worse place to be on Friday night. It wasn't that I had better plans. I just had no issues in my life. But I could tell. But I could tell by the look on my friend's face that I had hurt his feelings. I had a list of recovery principles in my Bible I had kept from a sermon series on recovery that had been preached in our church a couple of years earlier. I read them nearly every day. I could even think of people that needed CR. Now they had real issues. Several months later, my friend again asked if I would consider playing keyboards for CR. He just didn't get it. I didn't need the program, and I didn't want to be around those people. But that evening, I called another friend who I knew was in CR, but who had never told me I needed to be there. And I called him because I had yet another incident with one of my boys regarding jail, threats, and drugs. Out of nowhere, he said, "Libby, you need to go to Celebrate Recovery." I was shocked. It took my breath away. I asked him why. He told me I needed the program because of all that I was telling him about what I was going through with my boys and our situation. But he added, "Don't take my word for it. Ask David Bruns." So the first thing Monday morning, I called David Bruns, and he's a pastor at Fellowship who had started the Celebrate Recovery ministry in our church. And I had known him for years, and he had been through all my marriage, divorce, and children problems with me. And I asked him if he thought I needed Celebrate Recovery. He laughed and said yes. I have since realized he would never tell anybody they didn't need CR. I told him that a couple of friends suggested I give it a try, and I asked David why he thought I needed to go to Celebrate Recovery. He listed the many reasons. I was overwhelmed. I didn't know what group I should try, so he suggested the codependency group. There's that word again. I didn't know what that word meant, but I realized that if 3 people said I needed to go, I should at least try this thing out. After all, I knew of some folks that seemed to be more excited about living life since attending Celebrate Recovery. That very Friday evening, I walked into the most amazing time of worship. The band was great, and I saw what real worship looks like. I went to the newcomers group and found it very informative, and I actually concluded that this program seemed to be doing good work. Later, when I saw my friend Tim Holder, who had been bugging me to come to CR, he said I could have knocked him over with a feather when he saw me walk into that room. I have to admit, I didn't act very kindly to him when he gently encouraged me to see what CR was all about. Tim was the worship pastor that kept bugging me to play keyboards. I began attending the women's codependency group on Friday nights. I began to see the patterns and events that from a child made me respond the way I did with my family. I began to see my responsibility in the failure of my marriage. I began to understand my part in enabling my former husband, and even with my boys, I had prevented them from taking responsibility for their actions. I inappropriately defended them, and when they got into trouble, I bailed them out. I basically let them run the house and my life. I had made excuses for every action they took that was contrary to the rules, and then didn't keep my word when I set boundaries for those behaviors. I protected them from the consequences they should have experienced. I began to see my life much more clearly. Even beyond my behavior, I began to recognize the source of feelings deep down inside me, which caused me to react and do things out of a sense of guilt. I desperately needed to be needed. I tried frantically to control every situation. I valiantly and heroically appeared to have it all together. even though constantly fending off feelings of inferiority. I needed approval. I started attending a 12-step study group. Initially, I went because I had a friend who needed to go, and I went along as support. But I very quickly realized I needed the study for me. Gradually, I learned what codependency actually meant, how to set boundaries, and how not to enable, and how I needed to respond to my sons during times of crisis. Going to Celebrate Recovery is the best thing I could have ever done for me and for my boys. It has been over 3.5 years since I started my journey of recovery. Looking back, it is hard to believe I was as unhealthy as I was. What is even more amazing is how my family has grown as a result of my journey. As I began to learn why I responded the ways I did, and as I recognized the lie that my acceptance was based on my performance, which I had believed most of my life, I began to change. I have changed the way I relate to my boys, even though it is extremely hard. And in turn, that changed our relationship. Over 1.5 years ago, my oldest and youngest sons moved out of the house and began living on their own. As difficult as those circumstances of that move were, it was the very best thing that could have happened. They are now completely on their own. They don't ask me for money, and they have begun to understand the error of their ways and their mistreatment of me. My oldest son recently took a job as a store manager out of state. I did not want him to leave Little Rock, but beyond my desires, I knew that this was the best thing for him in his growth into manhood. I don't call him more than once a week, and this for me is a huge thing, considering I have wanted to control every move he has ever made. I wanted to keep him from drinking and from using drugs. I wanted to handle his money and choose his friends and basically do his recovery for him. Now his recovery is his own, and just like my own recovery, his will depend on how badly he wants it and the effort he is willing to put into it. My youngest son has his own car, lives on his own, pays his own bills, and works overtime if he's lacking for cash. He lives on a budget, saves his money, and shops very frugally. My middle son lives with me and is going to school full-time and working part-time, and he does chores around the house for his room and board. This healing in my family would have never happened if I had not taken the steps I did to work on my own issues. The best gift I could give my boys is that of a healthy mom. I am not the same person today. I am walking down a path I've never been down before. And the most amazing thing is that I am not walking it alone. I know there is someone who is just a little farther down the road of recovery than I, and that person gives me hope and encouragement to take another step. There are people that are not as far down the road as I am, and I am blessed and honored and humbled to show hope and encouragement to them. We are all in this as a family, together. And about 1.5 years ago, the Lord also blessed me with a fabulous new husband who shares the journey of recovery with me. Celebrate Recovery is my passion and my ministry. Never have I seen such miracles take place right before my very eyes. Every week, I am amazed at what God can do in lives. I hear testimonies from people who had no hope at all, and when they finally admitted that they were not in control, that their life was unmanageable, God began to work in their lives and bring about the changes He wanted to make. I can point out one person after another who has truly been transformed by the power of God. CR is not about sick people, it's about broken people. It's not about being a victim, but about being victorious. It's not about good intentions, it's about restoration. It's about stepping into the light of authentic relationships where I can experience the grace of God through being known and knowing others. Through God's caring persistence, His overwhelming grace, and His irresistible love, He got my attention through the hopelessness of my circumstances and the 3 friends who told me I could really benefit from Celebrate Recovery. I'm so glad I decided to listen and step way out of my comfort zone and go. I realize God finally has me where He always wanted me. Today, I realize that coming to CR on a Friday night is the highlight of my week, and it is the healthiest place to be. I am not ashamed to say I go to Celebrate Recovery. I am changed forever. And I'm also humbled and honored to say I'm one of those people, and that I'm a lifer. Thanks for letting me share my story.